Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Gladiators, the show where we discuss and debate literature in all of its forms. If it's written work, it's game. Let's meet the panel.
Hi, I'm Maya.
I'm Michaela.
And I'm Casey.
And I'm Josh. Today we have a lot of star power on our panel. We have Casey, who is an anchor to multiple YouTube channels. His most recent major project is CSB Television. We have Maya from Bespectacled, Michaela from Betwixt the Books. All of them have remarkable channels. Casey's also a writer and a playwright. What are your most recent projects, Casey?
From book point of view, I guess I'll show it to you, is a children's book series called American History. It's a 9-book series. Each book is featured to a ethnicity group, so African American, Asian, Hispanic, Native Indian, European, Australian, etc., and it's available on Amazon. So that's my latest book series.
That is pretty remarkable, especially how it caters to so many cultures and backgrounds and shows how diverse we are as a world. With those backgrounds, the only thing I can think of, though, is that woman that turned herself into a potato, if you've ever remembered.
No, I never heard of that.
Something happened where she did one of those background things to make it look good. And
Filter.
Yeah, the filter. Her face was on a potato. How are all of your endeavors going, Maya and Michaela?
Well, I'm kind of in the middle of college applications, which is scary. I do have to make my short films because I'm applying to film school. So that's really exciting. As far as other projects go, I'm kind of in the middle of them at the moment. My documentary went out a couple months ago, which is exciting. That's where I am.
What's the premise of the documentary?
It's called Miss This, and it's about 2020 and how it impacted American public school systems.
There's one thing for certain is I'm not going to miss 2020.
No, that's part of the irony.
My channel is just a YouTube channel. Myself and my partner Gretchen on the channel. My partner, she's not like my romantic partner. People get it. It's a dual person channel. We both do reviews. I've been a little bit absent this past month because I was reading a bunch of stuff for the BookTube prize. And so obviously I couldn't talk about that stuff. My content suffered for it, but hopefully this month I'll get back on that. Gretchen, and she's just plowing through a bunch of stuff. So if you like US history, go watch Gretchen's videos on presidents and stuff. And she also has been talking about a lot of romance books. There is a video that's coming out. This video is coming out way later than when we're filming this, but I know that there was a video that I'm super excited about that you can probably definitely go back and watch, where we read a novella that had a non-binary lead, which was super interesting, called The River Has Teeth, I believe, which was super cool. So that's a fun video if you want to go watch that.
It will definitely be worth checking out. By the time this video goes up, I'll probably... the intent is that I am judging octafinals of the 2022 BookTube prize.
There you go.
But I'm also going to be pre-taping some reviews going into next year. I hope you are enjoying your experience of the judging the BookTube prize semifinals, and I'm definitely going to watch your judgment video when it comes out. What we know for sure is that all of you have been engaged in more interesting things than the book that we're going to be going over today. Allegedly, the Booker Committee thought it was interesting enough to longlist it. We're going over Serotonin by Michel Houellebecq. I am just going to read the summary as far as the summary itself is concerned, and then I'll present to you a discussion starter and we'll have at it. Michel Houellebecq's Serotonin is a caustic, frightening, hilarious, raunchy, offensive, and politically incorrect novel about the decline of Europe, Western civilization, and humanity in general. Deeply depressed by his romantic and professional failures, the aging hedonist and agricultural engineer Florent Claude Labrosse feels he is dying of sadness. He hates his young girlfriend, and the feeling is almost certainly mutual. His career is pretty much over, and he has to keep himself thoroughly medicated to cope with day-to-day life. Suffocating in the rampant loneliness, consumerism, hedonism, and sprawl of the city, Labrosse decides to head for the hills, returning to Normandy, where he once worked promoting regional cheeses. That's supposed to be cheese is the plural for cheese. And where he was once in love, and even, it now seems, happy. There he finds countryside devastated by globalization and by European agriculture agricultural policies and encounters farmer longing, like Labrosse himself, for an impossible return to a simpler age. As the farmers prepare for what might be an armed insurrection, it becomes clear that the health of one miserable body and of a suffering body politic are not so different, and that all parties may be rushing toward a catastrophe that a whole drugstore's worth of antidepressants won't make bearable. What do you think was the central character's problem?
Himself. Every single problem that he had was his own fault. There is not a single thing that the outside world ever pushed on him. That was him. He was his own biggest problem.
I was talking with Professor Hartman, or Rennie, who's often on this channel, and we were examining what issues John Keats had had, and many other first romantic poets and writers, particularly those on the high end. Their problem is that they think too much. They spend way too much time thinking, and they should be utilizing what life has to offer, like become a goat farmer. I think that all of his problems were, I agree with you, Michaela, they were first world problems, and they were self-inflicted. I don't like to question people's issues involving mental health and psychiatric, but he just kept inflicting these upon himself. And his story was not interesting. If someone has to spend a whole chapter talking about their name, I think he beat Sam I Am for the record for most annoying introduction as to who your name is.
It's one of the main reasons why I really couldn't finish it, because it had a pattern of boring sex talk, boring sex talk, boring sex talk. I know being an author in the writer's world, they care more about page number and word count as opposed to story. And it's very frustrating because in the beginning, when he first meets up with his girlfriend, he's talking about her luggage the entire time and he couldn't remember what brand name it was. And then he goes, oh, I accidentally left it unattended. And so I'm assuming, oh my gosh, this is going to be stolen. The story's going to be about this luggage being stolen. Then we're talking about something else. So I'm trying to figure out, why did you talk about this luggage for 12 pages and it has nothing to do with the story? I personally believe it was just to get those word count in that page. I don't like reading books where I'm reading nothing just so you can get to your page count.
At first, it felt like it was going to go in the direction of On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, and how the chapters are shorter and they bring up whatever, it's structured as if it's stream of consciousness. Ocean Vuong's stories were very interesting. To me, his struggles and the way that he spoke of them and just his background in general was interesting. Labrosse's lifestyle was not.
No.
Yes, I agree with that. And even on the topic of Ocean Vuong, I'm reading On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous right now. He's a good writer. I have not read enough of this author to determine whether or not I think they're a good author, but I feel like there's just so much for shock value over actual content that I was just, one, bored, and two, wondering why he wrote this book. It doesn't seem like it would have been fun to write or revealed anything about himself or the world. I don't know. It just felt like a very unnecessary book.
Michaela has read this author and she does not like him.
I feel like he's the person who likes to poke a bear, if that makes sense. Like his whole point is to make you angry or upset. And he likes to hide behind like, well, oh, I'm holding up a mirror to society, because a lot of people like to talk about how his books seem to be prescient, how every time he's published a book, like something similar to the plot of the book has happened in real life as well. And he's like writing about these despicable men, like these horrible men with just bad habits, bad problems, like they aren't good, somehow hides behind that thing of like, oh, no, I'm holding up a mirror to you. You are the actual bad people. It is not my characters. I am just reflecting society back at you. And oh my God, do I hate it. It's so nihilist and terrible. I'm not a fan.
When Labrosse was talking about GMOs, I think that was thought-provoking. And when he was talking about cheese from the Normandy Trio, I mean, that's a little bit of a bias because I'm an enthusiast for cheese. If what he brings up does not provide you with the slightest of interest, you're not going to be interested in this book. You probably still won't be, because I would say that 90% of what he brought up was not interesting to me. As going back to what Maya had to say about her experiences of reading Ocean Vuong, his background is in poetry. On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous it is the first thing that he wrote. The first book or any form of prose that he's written. It's a book that you should read as opposed to this one. Nothing that's really going to get you perked up about this one. I think Booker International got it wrong.
Well, that was the problem I had when he started talking about work. He used the word bandsoul and why he doesn't agree with GMOs. I'm like, well, what does this have to do with you breaking up with your girlfriend? You reconnect with your ex-fiance who wasn't ready to get married. I'm like, what does this have to do? He kept going from place to place, and I couldn't put together anything he was saying. Like, what does this have to do with your story that you're trying to tell me?
Maybe if he wrote about his experiences of working for Monsanto and concentrated on that, maybe we would have had a little bit more of an interesting piece. I think he's a little too vain to actually make it interesting enough.
Yeah, something I will say is I read this while I was at work. I was ushering, which is sweeping the movie theaters and picking up the nacho cheese that people have spilled. And it's just a very disheartening task. And I lose faith in humanity every single time I have to do it. And so reading this book in between theaters was something else. And I just felt terrible at the end of the day because it's just a miserable book about a miserable person with a miserable outlook on the world.
If you're going to surround yourself with pedophiles and zoophiles, then you need to reevaluate.
Well, the question I have, being that you all read the end of it, did it make sense once you got to the end of it?
The last chapter, he was just talking about the medication that he took. It's implied that he's going to commit suicide because he's talking about it, about his plans to jump out his window.
Maybe that was the point, that people who are suicidal have choppy, you know what I mean? Because he was
This is just somebody.
I'm like, is that what he was he trying to say? If you see someone who is one moment talking about his girlfriend and the next moment talking about working with GMOs, maybe you should text.
This is just somebody who likes to be miserable. They're engaged in self-inflicted torture porn.
As someone who has taken antidepressants because I have depression, I'm not currently on them because I'm in a place in my life where like I don't need that to not want to kill myself. But as someone who has been in that place, I was never this miserable all of the time. I mean, not for everybody, not to make a blanket statement, but very generally is like peaks and valleys where the valleys are very low lows. And then there's days that are complete apathy and nothingness. This is like so disjointed and weird, especially because it gets to the point where like he almost blames the medication for a lot of his problems currently, which is not something that I think most people who take antidepressants feel. Generally, the antidepressants help you have a more stable emotional thing. Like it takes those peaks and valleys and makes them a little bit flatter. It's definitely not going to make you, I guess, just super fixated on the one girl that you kind of liked, but you ruined that relationship years ago.
That's a him thing, not a...
That's a him thing.
I think that having to rely on a medication or antidepressant, that's not really a good direction, but it's not really for me to say. I mean, the way that he went about it, the way that he went about his life choices was not the proper way to do so. Nothing about him was likable, and thus, because this is a first-person narration, we can't really break away from him. That caused this book to sink.
And just to go back to something Michaela mentioned with the framing of antidepressants and medication, I'm so tired of it being portrayed as like a horrible negative thing that like ruins people's lives in media. I have to take medication or I cannot function in the world. And I know that's not true for everyone with mental illness, but it has been a huge lifesaver for me. And so this book just didn't even feel like an authentic portrayal of mental illness or medication. It just felt like an author trying to justify a poor characterization with something that would apply to modern day. It felt like an attempt to critique something without understanding what that thing was.
It felt like Houellebecq read the description of the fact that like some antidepressants can lower libido and was like, that's the worst thing that could happen to a man ever. Decided to write a whole book about it.
But none of it made sense, really.
No.
Like, I would have liked him to stay on one topic, not jump around from topic. Like, 'cause when I first started reading it, I thought this was just a book about depression and taking pills. And then when he starts talking about relationships, I'm like, oh. And then he's like talking about vacation. I'm like, oh, we're on vacation. I couldn't understand, well, like, where are we going with this book?
And if you're going to jump topic to topic, at least make it interesting and at least make us like you.
I stopped reading because I just kept getting bored. I was like, I don't know, I can do this anymore.
I mentioned this to my boyfriend when I was reading it about how I know that there are going to be people who either have read it or will read it and will find comfort in the nihilism, because when you you are in a place where you feel like the whole world is garbage, you sort of want to add fuel to the fire and just like burn the whole world down, which is what I felt like this book was advocating for almost. If you look around you and all you see is sadness and depression, add to it. There's one point where one character said something along the lines of like he was glad that he ruined the recycling program by constantly throwing his like metal recycling in with the paper so he could help with the deterioration of the planet. And which is why I was like, even to the people who would like this book, I wouldn't recommend it to them because it seems to be advocating for that sort of mentality. Like it doesn't have any sort of negative, aside from you hating the character and the character being so over the top of a horrible person, it doesn't seem to be commenting on that thing in a negative way at all.
Does not engage in any redeemable qualities. Even if you were to recommend this, somebody's going to get something out of it. He referred to them as the German. I don't know if it's the same character. Americ. I don't know if he's synonymous with the German, the one that was engaged in sexual acts with the little girl.
No, I don't think so. I think those are two different characters. Yeah.
Okay. Americ ended up killing himself. He just referred to them as the German. He was watching him engaged in those sexual acts, and he knew that it was wrong, but yet he kept telling him he wasn't going to say anything about it.
And he didn't.
No, which you have that acknowledgement, but at the same time, those are the kinds of things that you really need to act upon because you can get your own self into trouble, and I think that's pretty sickening. Actually, very sickening.
It tries to make you hate him as much as possible. Like, and what is the worst thing that he could witness and have to say something on the positive about, and he just does nothing. That's sort of, it's trying to make you hate him. I kind of see that, but at the same time, I'm like, there is no commentary. There is nothing that is helping us to feel like you don't feel like this is okay.
Between that and seeing Yuzu making whoopee with dogs, that's zoophilia, which is also illegal, and sees something, acknowledges that it's wrong, but doesn't do anything.
And that's why I was so confused with the synopsis of this book, because I think the first word it uses to describe it is hilarious. And I watched a review, and this guy was like, yeah, it's a maddening book, but it's hilarious. And I'm just thinking, what about this is funny? Like, it's just, no.
I want my money back. Once you incorporate pedophilia and zoophilia, then it's all off the table. You can't be funny and incorporate those things.
So I'm going to make the assumption whoever suggested this book did it for an interesting conversation. Because I can't imagine who would want anyone to read this book.
If you want to listen to somebody who liked it, and I think it's the review that you watched, Clifford Lee Sargent, who runs the BookTube channel Better Than Food Book Reviews, really liked this book. One of many reasons why I don't regularly watch his channel anymore. He's a very charismatic person. I feel like a lot of the books that he started reviewing and talking about, I was like, yes, okay, so you're kind of like a not great human being. Okay, all right. And then I don't really want to support you anymore. Not that he isn't nice, but like some of the ideas that he likes to engage in, like with this book, he really liked it. And I was like, I don't know how you could do that, man. All right.
And to me, there's nothing wrong with a pretentious central character as long as they mean well. For instance, I read Stoner by John Williams a few years ago, and I felt that he had a pretentious disposition. He was somebody who it would be very challenging to like, and he surrounded himself with very miserable people. He meant well with his endeavors. The way that he went about his issues, it was just, I think he had the last laugh. The same cannot be said about this person here.
Has anybody read My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh?
I think I own it, but I have not read it yet.
I would really suggest you read it, especially because, like, assuming you just finished this, I'm not sure. It's similar in the character's outlook on life. Like, this woman is done with the world. She's in a super privileged position, but I loved that book. I thought it was hilarious, and I thought it did make a lot of really cool points, and a lot of other people hated it. I thought it was actually really insightful, and while I was reading this, I was feeling like it was a parody of that, even though it came out before. It's very difficult probably to write from this sort of character, especially first person, but it can be done, and it has been done well, as you mentioned, Josh.
I actually started reading this book, I think in the month that you first gave us the list. So it's been a while, and I was like, okay, 300 some pages, I can do this. And I'm just like reading it going, what is going on? And so I'm like, I gotta finish reading it, but I also had to, because it was a library book, so I was like, I had to get it back. And I finally got to the point and I said, you know what, I'm just not gonna finish. And I've had all this guilt for like 5-6 months. I'm like, I'm good. I feel so guilty. I'm gonna be the only everyone who didn't read it and didn't enjoy it. And
So you DNF'd it. That's an opinion.
to hear this, it's like, okay, so I wasn't the only one. I just thought there was something wrong with me. But I know I'm not an avid reader, which means I can't just pick up a book and read it. It has to catch me. It has to interest me. And once I stop getting interested, I just...
This was a struggle. This was something I could have zipped through. There were so many other more interesting things that could have been done opposed to read this book. And I also have other book, like I have Mouse. We're revisiting that. The Reptile Room from the series of Unfortunate Events that are far more interesting and catch my attention much more than this pretentiously vain rear end that is self-inflicting himself with misery and has no interest in turning it around.
0 stars out of 5. Would not recommend for anybody. Do not read this book.
Do we have any final thoughts aside from that?
Yeah, aside from please don't read this book. Please read like literally any other book.
Actually, yeah, I would really quick just be interested in what people thought about the portrayal of women in this book.
The only way that women are depicted are as prostitutes, they're depicted as whores, or they're depicted as opportunities for the male characters within this piece. And then there's Labrost's mom, who, along with his dad, they get in bed with one another and kill themselves.
I didn't get that far.
It's a miserable piece. I know a lot of people that have the tendency to complain. I think that listening to them is a bit more amusing. By that, I say none at all than this book. And I didn't get much out of it. I don't think there's any appeal. It's not like I could even say, well, this is just a commentary of everything that's going on around me.
I'm not saying this stuff isn't happening. It's just not happening.
Rating it 0 to 5, half stars permitted. You said 0.
0 stars. No stars.
How about you, Maya?
Well, probably put it on Goodreads, and I don't think they let you do 0 stars, so I'll do a solid 1.
I just put it under. I would just put it 1 star and then under 0
stars. If I could give you 0
That's
stars.
Smart. Maybe I'll try that.
Casey?
A -5? No. I feel bad, but it didn't interest me. The only time, and I feel horrible saying this, the only time I was interested is when he was talking about sex. Everything else was just, and it wasn't so much it was boring, it was that he took 12 pages to say hello. And it was like, can you just get to the point of what you're trying to say and move forward and not take so long and say the fact that he kept saying his girlfriend was a Japanese woman over and over and over. I'm like, I get it. First of all, I don't really need to know that she is Japanese because it has nothing to do with anything. And you've told me 5 times now. And I am frustrated with writers who spend so much time with unnecessary excess in their books. And so I definitely don't have to say, unfortunately, 0. Only because a lot of it in the book was not necessary for whatever. I don't even know what he was trying to say, but whatever he was trying to say, most of it.
So that's a 0 from you, Tim?
-2.
-2. Well, I'm going to be somewhat generous. I'm going to go with half a star because at least there was bits of commentary that were talking about the GMOs and talking about an interest in cheese. If you can go a little bit further on that, then maybe we have something. I probably should have bumped it down to a 0, but because of the immoral elements to it and how he was a witness to, but did not act upon inhumane acts. He does acknowledge that they're inhumane. I think that in order to get to that point, it would just need to be a work that is surrounded by, like Titus Andronicus is just, how many people can we kill by the end of this book? This book is worthless. It's trash. I think that there was something that was going on within the Booker community when they decided to long list this, because you had so many other different options. I didn't read those options, but I probably don't need to.
How long it took him to get it published? Like how many publishing companies rejected it?
He makes so much money. His books sell so much. It's ridiculous. Not like maybe the general populace everywhere is going to know Houellebecq as a name, but like he makes money. So it probably didn't take that much.
Yeah, when you get to that point, you can put out anything and it'll be released. It's a shame because often so when all they need to do is put something together in order to get a paycheck, then that's usually what happens. happens. New up-and-coming writers that have a pretty good product are left in the rain, which is sad, especially when those books are the ones that should be getting acclaim and not garbage like this.
If you need a positive for the Man Booker International, highly recommend the first book that ever won the Man Booker International, The Vegetarian by Han Kang. Great, brilliant book. Beautiful. Please read that. I have a couple of books on my shelves because I do read translated fiction quite a bit that were recommended by the Man Booker International that are quality and good. So I don't know. It was an off year.
For that, they had a prize, but they just awarded it to individual authors. This is what the book looks like. Don't read it.
That also confused me because looking at the cover, I thought sure I was reading a historic fiction. So when I started reading it, I'm like, wait, what decade are we in? And I don't get the book, the cover either. What it has to do with. I kept looking at the cover like this. I'm confused here.
Maybe that's the way he sees himself, a romantic with first world problems. Allegedly, it's supposed to be a satire for people of that day, but it doesn't come off that way. It's unfortunate that we did not enjoy this, but I look forward to all of the other good things that I have planned, my reading list. But be sure to join us next time on another episode of Literary Gladiators, where the intent is to go over something much better. And thank you to everybody for taking part, especially to, actually everybody has some star power on here. Casey will be on a good handful of episodes later in the season, but we want to thank Maya and Michaela from Bespectacled and Betwixt the Books for taking part in this one. Keep reading, everybody. Hi there, this is Josh, and on the next episode of Literary Gladiators, Dan, Charlie, and I will be discussing The Reptile Room by Lemony Snicket. This is the second book, or book the second, in a series of unfortunate events. And if you like what you see on our channel, we highly encourage you to support us on our Patreon. For the money that we make on our Patreon will allow us to provide you, the viewer, with even more great content. And we have a lot coming. Thank you, and for now, keep reading.